An ancient warrior, trapped in a wheelchair, rolled toward the silent tomb guard, his body a fragile vessel for a spirit forged in a forgotten war. Onlookers dismissed him as just another visitor, but then he reached the rope line and began to push himself up. His 90-year-old frame screamed in protest, muscles tearing, bones groaning. The guard remained frozen, a statue of duty, rifle locked to his shoulder. What he did next shattered a century of tradition, but it was his second move that truly stunned everyone. Before I show you exactly how one man's courage redefined honor, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The air over Arlington that morning was crisp and unforgiving, carrying the first real bite of deep autumn. The sun was a sharp, pale disk in the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across the marble plaza of the tomb of the unknown soldier. It was a light that offered no warmth, only clarity, sharpening the edges of the white stone and the flawless navy blue of Sergeant Leo Castillo's uniform. He stood at his post, an immovable object against the flow of time. To the hundreds of tourists gathered behind the black rope line, he was less a man and more a monument himself, part of the ceremony, part of the stone. His M14 rifle was an extension of his arm. Its polished would cool against his white glove. His sunglasses were a black, impenetrable void, hiding the ceaseless vigilance within. Inside Leo's mind, however, there was no silence. There was only the mantra of his training, a litany of rules burned into his soul. 21 steps. Turn. Face the tomb for 21 seconds. Turn again. Never falter. Never acknowledge. Never, ever break the routine. The voice in his head was that of his first instructor, a man whose words were as hard as the marble beneath Leo's feet. You are not a soldier out there, he'd barked. You are a symbol. You are the living embodiment of a promise. Your humanity is a liability. Your compassion is a weakness. Your only duty is to the silence. For 2 years, Leo had honored that creed with monastic devotion. He had stood through blistering heat that made the marble shimmer like water, and through freezing rain that turned his uniform to ice. He had ignored crying children, fainting tourists, and even the desperate plea of a woman who thought he was a park ranger. He was Sergeant Leo Castillo, a sentinel of the old guard, and his heart beat in 21-second intervals. Then he saw him. A subtle shift in the crowd's respectful murmur drew Leo's peripheral vision. An old man in a wheelchair was navigating the path, his movements slow but deliberate. His daughter, a woman with kind, worried eyes, walked beside him, a hand hovering protectively over his shoulder. The man himself was ancient, his face a roadmap of a life lived through hardship, his hands gnarled but strong as they pushed the wheels. Draped across his legs was a faded, meticulously folded United States Marine Corps blanket, a relic from another era. The tourists parted for him, a silent wave of deference. Something about his presence commanded it. He wasn't just old, he was historic. As he drew closer to the rope line, the sharp autumn sun caught a glint of metal on his chest. Leo's disciplined gaze, trained to register every detail without moving, locked onto it. It wasn't the usual collection of service ribbons. It was a single, 5-pointed star hanging from a pale blue ribbon adorned with 13 white stars. The Medal of Honor. A jolt, electric and profound, shot through Leo. Every other thought vanished. The instructor's voice faded. The rules became distant echoes. He knew the statistics. He knew the history. He knew that fewer than 70 men alive wore that medal. He was in the presence of living valor, a man who had faced the unimaginable and done the impossible. The man, Colonel Arthur Morgan, brought his wheelchair to a halt just feet from the rope. His gaze wasn't on Leo, but on the pristine white tomb. His thin lips were set in a line of grim determination. His daughter, Clara, leaned in, whispering something Leo couldn't hear, her expression a mixture of love and deep concern. The colonel just shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving the sarcophagus. He had not come here as a spectator. He had come here with a purpose, a promise, forged in the frozen hell of a place called the Chosen Reservoir. was stirring in his 90-year-old heart. And Leo Castillo, the man of stone and silence, felt the first crack appear in the foundation of his duty. The plaza seemed to hold its breath. The usual symphony of shuffled feet, quiet coughs, and camera clicks faded into an unnerving stillness. Even the wind seemed to quiet down, as if it, too, recognized the gravity of the moment unfolding. Colonel Arthur Morgan rested his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles white and stark against his weathered skin. His pale blue eyes, clouded with age but sharp with intent, were fixed on the tomb. In their depths, history swirled. The biting Korean wind, the flash of artillery, the faces of young men who never grew old. "Dad," Clara whispered again, her voice tight with anxiety. "Please don't," the doctors said. The doctors weren't there, Clara. Arthur's voice was a low rumble, rough like gravel, but underpinned with unyielding steel. "I made a promise. I came here to stand." His words, meant only for his daughter, seemed to ripple through the air. A few veterans in the crowd, identifiable by their unit caps and erect posture, exchanged knowing glances. They understood. They knew that some promises were heavier than time, stronger than muscle or bone. Then he began to push. It started as a subtle shift, a tightening of the shoulders, a bracing of the core. To the onlookers, it was almost imperceptible at first. But to Leo, whose entire existence was defined by the observation of minute details, it was a tectonic event. He saw the colonel's biceps bulge beneath the thin fabric of his jacket, veins standing out like cords of wood. He saw the wheelchair creak in protest, its metal frame groaning under the strain. Inch by agonizing inch, Arthur Morgan began to lift himself from the seat that had been his prison for over 2 decades. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Phones that had been raised to capture the stoic guard were lowered. A young boy, perched on his father's shoulders, pointed and asked, "What's the old man doing?" The father simply put a finger to his lips, his own eyes wide with disbelief. Inside Leo, a war was raging. Protocol is absolute. The instructor's voice screamed in his memory. "You do not see him. He is not there. The crowd is not there. There's only the tomb. 21 steps." But another voice, quieter and more powerful, rose from the deepest part of his being. It was the voice of the soldier within, the man who had sworn an oath not just to a piece of stone, but to the ideals it represented. That is a colonel, it whispered. That is a warrior. That is a hero who earned the right to your respect a lifetime ago. Arthur's body was shaking violently now. A sheen of sweat broke out on his wrinkled brow, each droplet a testament to the monumental effort. The muscles in his arms, atrophied from long disuse, screamed in silent agony. He wasn't just fighting gravity. He was fighting age, infirmity, and the ghosts of his past. Every inch he gained was a victory, a reclamation of a part of himself he thought was lost forever. He locked his elbows, his back ramrod straight, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. He was unsteady, swaying slightly, but he was upright. He was standing. For a moment, he simply stood there, a towering figure of sheer willpower. The faded marine blanket slipped from his legs and pooled at his feet, revealing the thin, lifeless limbs that had failed him so long ago. But no one was looking at them. They were looking at the man. And then, with a slow, deliberate precision that defied the violent trembling of his body, he raised his right hand. His fingers came together, crisp and straight, and touched the edge of his brow. The salute was perfect. In that single, flawless gesture, 90 years of life, of war, of pain, and of honor converged. The plaza was utterly silent, frozen in a state of sacred awe, and Sergeant Leo Castillo's world fractured. The rules, the training, the years of discipline, they all turned to dust. Time seemed to warp and stretch in the profound silence that followed the colonel's salute. For Leo, every second felt like a minute. He could hear the blood pounding in his ears, a frantic drumbeat against the disciplined rhythm of his training. The instructor's voice was a frantic shriek in his mind. Maintain your bearing. He is a distraction. Your post is sacred. But the image in his peripheral vision burned through the dogma. He saw the shaking arm, the perfect form of the salute, the glint of the Medal of Honor, a star that had been forged in fire and courage. It wasn't a distraction. It was the entire reason he was standing there. It was the living soul of the sacrifice the tomb represented. The war inside him ended. The soldier won. In one explosive, impossibly sharp motion, Leo broke protocol. Crack! The sound of his dress, shoes, striking the marble was like a rifle shot, echoing across the plaza. He pivoted on his heel, his body a blur of controlled power. He shifted his M14 from his right shoulder to his left in a single, fluid movement, a maneuver of honor reserved for the highest dignitaries, but never performed for a mere spectator. His right hand snapped up to his own brow, his white glove a stark contrast against the dark frame of his sunglasses. He returned the salute. For a moment that felt suspended outside of time, the two men were locked in a silent communion. The 90-year-old warrior, standing on legs that had forgotten how, and the 30-year-old sentinel, standing on a foundation of rules he had just shattered. Generations of service, of sacrifice, of a shared, unspoken code passed between them in that gaze. Leo saw the colonel's lips move, forming a whisper too faint to hear, but clear in its intent. For them. A small, almost imperceptible nod was Leo's reply. It was all he could give, but it was enough. The crowd remained breathless. A retired Marine in the front row, his own hands gnarled with age, slowly raised a salute of his own, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. Parents pulled their children closer, trying to explain in hushed tones that they were witnessing something holy. But the human body, even one possessed by an iron will, has its limits. Arthur Morgan's strength began to abandon him. The violent trembling in his arms intensified, his knees buckled, and his balance faltered. A look of pained surprise crossed his face as his body betrayed him. Clara cried out, "Dad!" and lunged forward, but she was too far away. He was going to fall. And then Leo broke protocol a second time. This break was not about ceremony. It was about humanity. He dropped his salute. Two long, precise strides closed the distance between them, his boots striking the stone with an authority that was both commanding and compassionate. He didn't hesitate. With the same grace he used to handle his rifle, he slid his left arm around the colonel's chest, catching the old man's weight. He gently, respectfully, lowered the frail body back into the familiar confines of the wheelchair. Arthur's head lolled back against the headrest, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The fire in his eyes was dimmed by exhaustion, but it was not extinguished. Leo knelt on one knee beside the chair, a position of deference, of service. He leaned in close, his voice a low, steady murmur meant only for the colonel. "You stood for them, sir," Leo said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Let us stand for you now." A flicker of a smile touched Arthur's lips. His hand, trembling from the exertion, weakly rose and rested for a second on Leo's shoulder. "Thank you, son," he breathed. The plaza watched, silent witnesses to an act of honor that no regulation could ever contain. As Leo remained kneeling, his white-gloved hand still resting steadyingly on the armrest of the colonel's wheelchair, a new figure began moving with crisp purpose from the direction of the memorial amphitheater. The crowd parted instinctively. Leo recognized the sharp cadence of the footsteps immediately. He straightened his back, bracing for the inevitable reprimand. It was Captain Eva Rostova, his company commander. She was a formidable officer, known for her piercing intelligence and an adherence to regulations that was as legendary as the Old Guard itself. In her eyes, there was no room for gray. There was only the mission, the standard, and the unyielding perfection it demanded. She came to a halt a few feet away, her posture immaculate, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Her eyes took in the exhausted colonel, his daughter weeping silently beside him, and finally, they settled on Leo. He could feel the weight of her stare even through his sunglasses. He had broken the two most sacred tenets of his duty. He hadn't just acknowledged a visitor. He had physically interacted with one, abandoning his post. He prepared for the end of his career as a tomb guard. But Captain Rostova didn't look at him with fury. Her expression was unreadable at first, carved from the same disciplined stone as her soldiers. She looked past Leo, her eyes locking for a long moment on the Medal of Honor still rising and falling on Arthur Morgan's chest. A subtle shift occurred in her jawline, a minute softening. "At ease, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent plaza. "You did the right thing." Relief, so potent it almost made him dizzy, washed over Leo. He gave a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement, not daring to speak. It was then that another man stepped out from the circle of veterans who had gathered. He was older, walking with a slight limp, wearing a faded VFW cap. He stopped beside the wheelchair and placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Colonel Morgan," he asked, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know if you remember me. Private Jackson Davies. Chosen Reservoir." Arthur Morgan, who had seemed depleted moments before, slowly lifted his head. His tired eyes focused, and a spark of recognition flickered within them. "Davies," he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. "I thought the cold got you." "Almost did, sir," Jack Davies said, his voice cracking. "But you came back. We all thought you were gone, but you came back for us." He turned his gaze to the silent crowd, to Clara, to Leo, and to Captain Rostova, becoming a storyteller for history itself. "They told us to retreat," he said, his voice growing stronger. "The whole division was being overrun, but our platoon was cut off. Jack pointed a trembling finger at Arthur, was just a captain then. He got a small group out, then he turned around. He went back, alone, into that nightmare of ice and bullets. Not once, not twice. 3 times he went back, dragging wounded men on a makeshift sled. He paused, swallowing hard. On his last trip back, with me and 2 others on that sled, a mortar hit. Took his legs, but he never let go of the rope. He crawled the last half-mile, dragging us with his arms. He saved us. Jack looked down at the colonel, his eyes filled with a reverence that transcended rank. "That medal," he said softly, "cost him his legs. But today he stood up. For all the boys who never left that frozen mountain." The story settled over the plaza, filling the silence with the weight of unimaginable sacrifice. Captain Rostova's stoic expression had melted away, replaced by one of profound respect. Mike turned his head, his gaze finding Leo one last time. "Guard," he said, his voice regaining a measure of its command. "Your post. It matters. Don't you ever forget why you stand on it." Leo swallowed, the words catching in his throat. "Yes, sir," he replied, the phrase now feeling less like a response and more like a renewed oath. What happened on that marble plaza wasn't just a soldier breaking rules. It was a powerful reminder that some principles transcend any written code. It was a moment where the living spirit of honor reached across generations to connect 2 servicemen, reminding everyone watching that true duty isn't about blind obedience. It's about recognizing the humanity and sacrifice that our most sacred symbols are meant to protect and having the courage to act on it. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone set aside rules for a higher purpose? A time when you saw a quiet hero, someone whose story was hidden in plain sight until one act of courage revealed it all? What would you have done if you were in Sergeant Castillo's shoes, caught between ironclad duty and profound respect? Do you think the highest form of honor is following orders or knowing when to follow your conscience? Let us know your thoughts below. If this story reminded you that the greatest heroes often carry the heaviest burdens in silence, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about courage, sacrifice, and the moments that define us. Share this with someone who understands that honor is earned, not given. We read every single comment, and we value your perspective, so please be respectful when sharing your thoughts with the community. We're all here to learn from each other. More stories about incredible veterans and the quiet battles they still fight are waiting for you on your screen. Watch those next to see more unforgettable moments of bravery, and we'll see you in the next one with another story that will challenge the way you see the world.